Welcome everybody to the first video research workshop for the spring 2024. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Kai-Ping Chen, who is an assistant professor in computational communication at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Department of Life Science Communication as well. She is also a faculty affiliate at the Department of Political Science, the Data Science Institute, and the Institute for Diversity Science. Her work uses data science and machine learning methods, as well as interviews to study to what extent digital media and technologies hold politicians accountable for public well-being and how deliberative designs improve the quality of civic dialogues and mitigate misinformation and perception. In a moment, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Chen. The plan is to keep questions at the end, so we'll have a Q&A period once your presentation is done, but you're welcome to put questions that you have as the talk arises into chat, and we will get to those when we can. I also want to remind people that we have two more speakers in the video research workshop series. On March 15th, we have Julia Park, who's an assistant professor at The Ohio State University, who does a lot of excellent work on using natural language processing to understand things like grandstanding in the US Congress. And then we have Nathan Kelly, who's a professor of political science, who has a really exciting paper looking at a long time frame of congressional speech patterns and understanding how partisanship has influenced them. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will make sure that Dr. Chen is a co-host. I think she's good. So Dr. Chen, if you can share your screen and take us away. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryce, for inviting me. And I'm super excited to meet everyone. So can everybody see my slides now? Okay, awesome. Cool. So today I'm super excited to share about my work on uncovering gender stereotype in science video. So I want to share with you a recent paper my co-author and we worked together on especially looking to controversial science discourse like vaccination, climate change in TikTok and YouTube videos. And we want to see how our women versus men, how they are portrayed in the videos. So what motivates our research? So there are lots of, very extensive research which show that gender stereotypes, gender inequity in general within the science community. So this is a recent science paper published, which they look into for faculty members across all the STEM and non-STEM major. So they look at the attrition rate and the promotion rate between faculty member from assistant to the full level. So the green dots represent woman faculty member, and the black dots represent male faculty members. So what we see that, across this picture is for woman faculty member, they are much more likely to have a higher attrition rate. And however, they are less likely compared to their male counterparts to be promoted. And this is, our evidence pattern across no matter which sector regarding the professional they come from. So we see that there are, gender inequity within the science communities. And also there are gender stereotypes in public perception of what are the desirable traits when people think about women versus men. So this is an interesting report from the Pew Research Center. They ask a bunch of representative Americans regarding, what are the important traits you think about men versus women that comes to your mind? And what do you think about negatively or positively regarding a variety of traits? So the report name is, they call strong men, caring woman. So that's the general conclusion they have is, if we can look at this picture here, what they see is, so on the left side is a bunch of traits, right? Leadership, ambition, powerful, kind, responsible. So these are all the variety of traits. And the yellow dots represent men, and the green dots represent woman. And then they are on the left side. If it's toward the left, it means that this trait is viewed negatively, or which trait is viewed positively. So what we see that for men, a lot of the traits, like for women, those traits are viewed more positively, are those traits regarding compassionate, caring, and responsible. But when it comes to men, the traits which are viewed much more positively, which is the green dots on the top of the graph, are leadership, ambition, and strong. So these are again showing that in our public perception of mind, there are certain gender stereotypes, not only in terms of equity within the science community, but also toward the general public. So this is actually gender stereotype. The phenomenon is well documented in the literature. So stereotypes are those cognitive structure in our minds that when we think about certain social groups, we try to assign certain traits to them. So across the social psychology literature, scholars find that women are perceived to have more gentle traits, while men are usually viewed more toward more assertive, more authoritative, and they can handle with professional tasks much more well. So this is a lot of interesting finding in the social psych literature. And if we look into the science communication scholarship, they also see that if you ask people about the traits, whether women versus men, do they have the traits to become scientists, to be competent in the STEM professionals. So this is where people also think that women perceived holding less these desirable traits for working on science issues. And also our social media research, some of the recent work, they found that users, they will comment differently in terms of negativity, positivity, or in terms of using relatively violent language, depending on whether they comment on the woman content creator versus the man content creator. So this is kind of like well documented in regarding the gender stereotypes. So what is less known in the body of the literature is how are genders, right, depicted in public discussion on controversial sciences in the digital world. So many of the work still focusing on, using survey methodology or asking among the science community or asking the general public what they think about men versus women. But when it comes to social media, if we look at those videos that communicate about science information or misinformation, how do they portray different gender in the digital world? So this is a less known issue. And why that is very important, because already we know that a lot of the theory regarding motherhood, ecofeminism, they talk about that women, they are given disproportionately more responsibility to taking care of environmental issues, to taking care of health of their child. So there are these evidences in the context of science, which show that women carrying more responsibility, but we just don't know. What about on social media? And there are some, anecdotal evidence recently showing that influencers, they are actually deliberately targeted anti-vaccination messages on the mothers. So we know that there's a lot of things going on in the social media, and we need to understand better about how genders are portrayed in this controversial science discourse. And under that kind of broader, less known question, we also want to know two further issues. So the first is, if we observe these gender stereotype patterns, right, how might these patterns differ or are similar across platforms? Because we know that different platforms, even for the study we look into YouTube versus TikTok, they have very different features, even though they are all video intensive platform. So there are a lot of the features which can influence how content creators might deploy these social identity cues differently and how the audience could engage with them differently. So this is why we need to understand more regarding, how does this pattern differ or similar across the platforms? And also, we know that when it comes to a study understanding video, right? Video consists of a variety of mode of communication. Some of the times it's the video caption people see, which have social gender cues. But some of the times it's the images in the videos. So this is where we also need to think about a multimodal approach to understand how gender is portrayed in the textual part of the videos and versus the visual part. And many of their work actually talk about a concept called picture superiority effect compared to texts, where people, when you show them the visual, they actually can amplify their gender bias, amplify their emotion much more than if you just show them the texts. So this is another kind of the nuance we are unpacking in this paper, is also to look into how content creators talk about different genders in text part of the video versus in the image part. So the general question we ask is, the first is, how do content creators, right, how do they communicate science issue when they communicate science on social media? How do they employ gender associated stereotypes? And we look into both the TikTok and YouTube separately, and we also look into different modalities. And the second question is regarding, how do audience engage with this science video that deploy gender cues versus those video that doesn't deploy gender cues, or those video who use more gender neutral form language like we, or they, them, you, this type of gender neutral language. So this is to give you an example of some of the video in our data set. So for instance, we can see that sometimes in the video descriptions, they have this kind of gender-related cue. For instance, this is the video about Greta Thunberg talking about fight against climate change on the show, on the Daily Show. And then in the video description where you see I circle here, it's a way where they talk about, oh, the 16-year-old activist, she rebelled to American to do a bunch of things. So this is just an example of using woman-related cue. And on the right side, this is another talk, our talk show talking about climate change. And this is where you see in the video description part, they talk about Trump, right? Describe Earth's climate as record clean. So they use cues like his. So this kind of male-related cue. And when it comes to TikTok, another type of gender-related cues are things related to, say, for instance, this is where a TikTok content creator say, mom got the vaccination. So mom is another kind of like woman-related cue. So these are just some examples of the gender cues which are used kind of like in the video description. So the data set we are looked into are from two platforms, and we focus on two issues. One is we focus on the climate change issues, and the other is we're focusing on the vaccination issue. So we use the YouTube application programming interface, which allow us to retrieve those highly viewed videos based on the search words related to climate change vaccination. And for the TikTok, we collected from a third-party vendor called Junkipedia. So this is a user-flagged misinformation videos. So we also collect, using the same search query words. And then we collected from 2015 to 2022. So this is where we collect lots of videos from both platforms regarding these two issues. So now, how do we measure gender languages in science videos? So this is where we try to identify gender cues in different modality, right, within the video. So first, we look into our gender cues in the video captions. So how do they talk about different genders? And for this, we develop a lexicon. We call it the woman cue lexicon and the man-related lexicon. So within the woman-related lexicon, we have words related to woman-related pronouns, but we also included all of the words which are relational words when you regard to woman, mom, grandma, girlfriend, daughter. So any kind of those woman-related relational words. Same for the male lexicon. So these allow us to know which video description talk about female cues, which talk about male cues. And then what we do is we also use another method to look into those video caption, video description. So this is where we want to think about gender stereotype. A lot of the literature talking about many of the gender stereotype are about morality, things related to loyalty, care, authority, which are assigned to women and men. So this is where we use our backed moral foundation dictionary. So we draw from an existing moral foundation dictionary, but then we develop our new method to use a variety of word embedding to give each word a score about regarding how they assign the different use moral words. And then we also go beyond just to try to identify stereotype related to morality. We want to think about what are some of the other stereotypes beyond those moral language. So this is where we choose our structured topic model, which allow us to know, let's look into those video caption which talk about female only versus talk about male only. What are some of the themes, frames they generated when they talk about woman versus man? So this is where we try to use our structured topic model to identify stereotypes beyond morality, the use of moral language. So this is how we look into the text data part. And then for the image data set, so for this paper, we look into the thumbnail, because thumbnail is usually a representative picture. Sometimes the content creator choose deliberately to represent their video. So the way we analyze those thumbnails is, again, we look into the thumbnails in those videos which only use female cues. And then we also look into the thumbnail for those videos who only use male cues. And then we use our unsupervised image clustering method, which is basically, I'm going to show you in the next slide, is you put all of those images in, and then it will cluster images into different clusters. And then the human researchers will label what each cluster of image, what message, what label, what theme it generates. So this is where this is an example 10 clusters of images from those videos which use woman-related cues. So let's zoom into one of the cluster, very interesting. So this is one image in cluster 3. So these are all the images they put together, and they want researchers to interpret what we mean by that cluster of image. And we know that that clusters are all the images which are those woman content creator. They use vlog style to talk about science issue. So this is where we give the label of this cluster, vlog style, images. And then we label our other clusters based on what are some of the general themes emerged in that cluster. So the next bunch of cluster you see, the 10 clusters, are those thumbnails used in those man cued only videos. So again, let's zoom into one of the clusters. So this is a very typical cluster, which they show a lot of the discussion about climate or conspiracy theory or debunking of conspiracy theory, showing politicians, scientists, or sometimes they just show the slides of this is the truth of climate change, or this is climate engineering. So this is an example of cluster where we give the label where they talk about debunking or propagating our controversial knowledge about climate change or vaccination. So this is how we label each of the clusters. So now let's look into some of the very interesting results we have in this paper. So the first thing is, let's just look into the video description part regarding the use of moral languages. So this is a table where on the left side column is the use of different moral language, care related words, authority related words, loyalty, fairness, sanctity. And then we do platform separately. So you see the YouTube platform, and we do the 2-sample t-test to see whether these words are much more likely to be used in those woman-cued video or versus man-cued video. And then we do the same thing for those TikTok video captions. So what do we see here very interesting is on the YouTube platform, when it comes to video caption which refer to mother, she, her, hers, they are much more likely to use care, loyalty, fairness, sanctity related words compared to those videos who talk about he, him, or refer to male related words. But that is not the thing we observe on TikTok. So it's a little bit different. On TikTok, we don't see this difference. And then what we see is when it comes to the use of authority related words, we see that the coefficient here is negative, right? Minus 2.141. This means that this language is less likely to be used in those videos that refer to woman cues versus male cues. So in a word that when it comes to authority, the videos which talk about male-related cues, they are also more likely to use authority-related words. So this is where the general pattern here, of course, we see some difference across the platform, but we see that when it comes to talking about women, people are also tend to more use words related to care, loyalty, but when it comes to talking about men, they tend to use words related to authority. And then we also run the structured topic model to look into, what type of themes are more likely to come up in those woman-related cued video captions versus men. And again, we see similar patterns. So everything on the right side of this vertical dashed line means those are the topics which are much more likely to be appear in those videos that use woman-related cues. So these are the topics we see: vaccination for children. Again, second topic is introducing baby products, a lot of baby product video on YouTube and TikTok. Side effects, vaccine safety for children, or sometimes music and songs. So these are more likely to appear in those video description when they talk about women. And then what we see on the bottom side here, so when this coefficient is negative, This means that these are the themes which are more likely to appear in video description when they talk about men. So these are the things regarding misinformation and climate denial. They are more likely to appear in those videos which talk about men. Same for lots of the things which you see down the bottom are things regarding talking about science, misinformation, these related topics. So these are what we see in the video description part. We do see a very different pattern. When people talk about women versus men, what are the things they assign to them? Then we look into the thumbnail, right? So the left picture are the percentage of thumbnails in those woman cute videos. And we human label the category. And then we, on the right side is for those men. And let's look into one by one. So first is, in those videos which only talk about woman cues, there is a very high percentage, 23% of their thumbnails, they show vlog woman selfies. So this is just an example of some of the selfies in those videos where they show that inspirational woman or those very big headshots of women. So this is where we see a lot in the thumbnails when it comes to women. And then for men, we see a very higher percentage of thumbnails, 48% of the thumbnails, when they talk about, refer to men-related cues. They're actually talking about conspiracy. Sometimes they propagate conspiracy. Sometimes they try to fight, talk about the debunk conspiracy. So we do see there are very different topics in the thumbnails when it comes to how they portray man and woman. One is more on the selfie, right? Vlog style, inspirational, beautiful woman. But on the other side, when it comes to men, it's about science or misinformation. Let's debunk them. It's those slides, information, more informational. And then when we look into, how the audiences, right, the TikTok and YouTube users, how do they engage with these videos which use gender cue versus not? So this is where we look into the two dependent variable. One is the number of views. The other is the number of likes. And then the independent variable, the main variable of interest is whether a video description use woman-related cues. And the baseline is they don't use woman-related cues. And then the other variable is use of male-related cues. The baseline is don't use male-related cues. So what we found that doesn't matter whether they use woman or man-related cue, it actually increased the number of views and likes by 1.5 times. So as long as you use the cue compared to not use the cue, it actually generates more views and likes from the users. And the next one is a bit interesting. So next one, our independent variable is whether a video use any of the gender cues. And then the reference group is those videos who use gender neutral words. So they use words regarding we or you or they. And what we found is there's no difference in terms of user engagement, whether you use gender cues or actually use gender neutral cues. So these provide some of the implication for us to think about communicating science online. Sometimes do you really need to use those cues to talk about who should be responsible for environment or vaccination? Or maybe sometimes just talking about shared responsibility like we or they, because you don't lose your users if you choose to use these gender neutral cues. So just to summarize some of the interesting things we observe in this paper and some of the directions we haven't considered but want to do. So first is we show the application like social media platform like TikTok and YouTube. They actually amplify some of the existing gender stereotypes we observe in the offline world. So we see that again on the digital world, we again see caring woman like we see in the Pew Research report, right? Caring woman, beautiful selfie. And for men, it is more about professional men, authority style. So we see this pattern replicate in the digital world. And another thing we see is, although we see that using gender-related cue receive more views and likes compared to not using them, we also found that actually, if you choose to use gender-neutral cues, you don't lose your audience. There's no difference in terms of audience engagement compared to, let's just try to use woman versus man, those cues in the videos. So this offers some of the potential intervention strategy for us to think about if we want to mitigate gender stereotypes in the digital platform when we communicate about science issues, maybe thinking about the language which call for more collective responsibility is a better way to mitigate some of the existing gender stereotype. And also as content creator, you don't lose your audience because the user engagement doesn't change. So these are just some of the future potential strategy we can talk about. So there are some of the limitations our paper haven't thought about, but I think it's important to highlight here. So we talk a lot about TikTok versus YouTube. We see different patterns, but this is a paper we think it's just a starting point to think about why cross-platform matter, because we do see the gender patterns differ between these two platforms. And for future research, we need to think about more systematic ways of analyze what are some of the features across which differ between different platforms that can influence the use of social identity cues. And one way is more systematic analysis, but we also need to do sick analysis to ask content creators how they utilize different features on TikTok, YouTube, when they think about where they want to put those social cues to catch attention from the audience. So we need to dive more deeper into thinking about the affordance of different platforms in generating or influencing the decision of how content creators think about how they want to use this social identity narrative. And also, we look into the user engagement in this paper on a very basic level in terms of view and like. And it would be super interesting to look at the comments, whether those videos who use gender cues, if you look at the comments received, whether it's also contagion in the comments. And there are also other researchers who already show that identity language can become contagion from the original post to the comments they receive. And finally, another point I want to raise here is there are, our paper is part of a special issue in the journal. And there is other wonderful article like by Sarah Sugars and her team, which talk about thinking about gender beyond man versus woman. So that's a very, limitation in our paper. We take a simple approach, but we want to think about genders in terms of other categories and also as a more fluid concept in our future next project. So if you want to learn a little bit more about video as research data, we have a paper chapter we are working on in a forthcoming handbook of quantitative research methods in communication. So we have a chapter we are working on that called video as data in computational analysis. And we are introducing a variety of tools, approach, a framework of how you do step-by-step, thinking about analyzing different parts of the videos. So watch out for that upcoming chapter. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. I'm going to start asking some of the questions in the chat, but Dr. Chen's discussion of her project is exactly what the video research workshop is all about. The other speakers that we have on March 15th as well as April 9th are people that I know their work, and I'm equally excited about introducing it to this audience because it really is the sorts of things that we're trying to do at the C-SPAN Center for Scholarship and Education, trying to advance the use of text, audio, and video data with respect to social science applications. And this is a great example of that. So thank you so much. So with respect to questions, I'm going to go through the ones that are in chat. If you have additional questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you and then unmute your mic and you can ask your questions once we get through what we have in chat. So the first question that we have is how do you separate a video containing both male and female cues?
So this is where when we do the analysis, you see regarding the textual part as well as the thumbnail. So this is where we see that indeed across our data set, there are video description which use both he and she. So when we do the comparison of or how do people use moral language, we only look into those videos who only use female cue. And for those videos who only use male cue. So we didn't include those videos who use both cues, otherwise it's gonna add noise to the data set. So this is how we separate, because we have the lexicon here. So this is where we look into, for each of the video description, we are able to know whether they use female cue, whether they use male cue, and whether they use both. So we only do the analysis separately for those who only use female versus only use male. Same for the thumbnail. So this gets us the cleanest picture.
Yeah, so we have two questions that are about non-binary gender cues. And so I know you just spoke about this on the very last slide of your talk. So it'd be interesting to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that. And something that I'm just personally interested in is that I mean, as you know, there's a lot of work in terms of how through text to identify kind of gendered words, but all of those are defined in terms of men and women. And so I think that this is obviously an important discussion, but I'm just curious. Yeah, I mean, where do you think it's heading with respect to these types of lexicon approaches when you think about non-binary genders? Do you think like the research community is starting to more kind of aggressively deal with this point? And I'm just kind of curious to know where you think it's at. So feel free to answer.
Yeah. So this is a really excellent question. So there's a wonderful paper, I pointed out in the last slides, but also I think first, I don't think the research community have done enough on thinking about using lexicon approach to think about beyond man versus woman. So we haven't done enough job, and we do need to do more. And one of the kind of the approach, there are two approach we can think about heading to. The first is, if we think about the lexicon approach, it's really important that we need to also include other gendered words rather than just man or versus woman. So we need to look into the other literature to know about non-binary. What are some of the words, coded language? Sometimes are coded language, some are non-coded language they use on social media when they talk to each other. So this is where it will help us develop a lexicon to capture that angle. And we do need to do that much more. And the second kind of the thing which is very interesting is some of the scholarship in social media studies. So they, rather than when they look into the visual, rather than they talk about, oh, this is about a woman or a man, they use languages called identity performance. So many of the times you see the visual, it is about the way the picture is presented. You can't know, oh, this is man or this is woman. So the way they analyze that is they look into gender performance, where they analyze how people tend to use feminine gestures, such as they will analyze things regarding whether people use gaze or whether people use exaggerated expression. So they draw a lot of the work from Golfman in the 1970s when they analyzed those magazines. So this is where they didn't think about gender as a binary. They more look into whether a picture show more feminine gesture or the picture show more a masculinity gesture. So this is how they put on a fluid concept. So this is where when we come to think about the thumbnail visual analysis, that's another way to approach this topic. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is a little bit more technically oriented. So it's about choosing the number of clusters within an unsupervised learning algorithm. So the bit that I'll add to this is, I mean, you're well aware that when it comes to text, that there's a lot of metrics that have been developed to determine whether or not documents have been separated or text has been separated and clustering. With images, I'm sure such things exist. I've really just have not put much thought to it. But when it comes to image clustering, how do you determine the number of clusters? And when you make that determination, is it, how do you say this is the right or wrong number of clusters?
So I think in our supplementary material, we'll talk in more details how we choose the number of clusters. So there are two ways to approach that. One is quantitative. There are existing measures, what we did in this paper, but also the second approach, which we also use, is by human expert. You need to look into whether the cluster are meaningful. So let's focus on the first method. So there is a metric called within cluster consistency. So this is where you can think about, we can have a variety of choice of cluster, right? You can choose 10 cluster, you can choose 50, you can choose 20, you can choose 25, 30, 35. So how can we know what number of clusters are the best? So what we do by within cluster consistency is, let's say we have 10 clusters. You go to cluster 1, you draw 20 sample images from cluster 1, and then you see whether they have a consistent theme. So for instance, if you see majority of the picture are about one theme, and then let's say that theme is vlog style, then what you're gonna do is for those 20 pictures in that cluster, you're gonna calculate the percentage of picture which are indeed vlog style. So for row 1, you're gonna get a number like 90%. And then for row 2, you have a label, right? You see how many pictures, what's the percentage of pictures which match that label. So you have another percentage, right? And for each row, basically each cluster, you have that percentage, right? And then this allow you to know when the number of K is 10, what is the within cluster consistency? So basically is whether there is a consistent theme in each row, rather than every row shows you, sometimes on one row, you see a vlog, you see a politician, there's no consistent theme. So this is a way we can calculate. And then you compare if you choose K equals 15 or you choose K equals 20. So this is where you can exactly calculate like what we did in this table about that one. So this is a quantitative measure, and we know that in the topic modeling, we do that too. And then there is also very, very important, because sometimes you will see that there are some of the elbow point where whether I choose 20 or choose 30 or 35, the percentage are quite similar, and it's sometimes very hard to decide by the quantitative number. So then what we do is the research team need to look into those each rows under different solution. And then we're gonna discuss about which one give a more meaningful label in terms of how we label each cluster. So this is also a lot of the human interpretation needs to kick in. And then at that stage, if we can't decide a best solution, let's say, oh, K equals 15 versus K equal 20 versus K equal 25, they are quite similar in terms of the quantitative matrix, as well as the human interpretive matrix. Then we replicate our finding. Let's say when K equals 10, this is your finding about woman versus man regarding the thumbnail, the patterns. And then let's replicate on when equals 15. Let's replicate that when K equals 20. Do you see that pattern still existed? So we do corroboration. So this is where within the image analysis, we indeed needs to do validation, lots of validation on that. Yeah.
Excellent. So the last question that we have in chat right now is more subs-link oriented, but I want to kind of keep us on this more methods oriented track just briefly. So let me interject another question that might be useful for people who are joining us today. You know, the basic question is, so if I want to do what you do, you know, how would I go about learning those types of techniques? And so I know part of the answer is probably similar to myself. You know, you receive training at the PhD level. I personally learn a lot from teaching these methods to other people, which I'm sure it resonates with you as well. But if you don't have access to those kind of more formal avenues for getting training in this, what are some good ways for people to try to start learning some of these methods if they don't have access to some of those types of classes or instructors and that sort of thing? How could they participate in this type of work?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of ways to think about that, right? So one is like some of the work here, like you can think about collaboration, because many of the times, like the gender stereotype, this is a topic which not just the communication scholar or political science scholar, so social psychology scholar are interested. Computer scientists, they are very interested, but they talk about different language. They talk about fairness in AI. Gender. And so this is where you want to, as an early career scholar or graduate student, I always are encourage this kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration. So then it is actually very important. Take this, slide, for example, the optimal number of K. Computer scientists, they can calculate the quantitative starts, or people who know this method, they can calculate the starts. But then if you don't know about this method, you can offer your interpretation about what labeling makes more sense. So this is where you can bring your own expertise. So computational, it's not a method just about programming. It's also about a method regarding humanities. So this is where you don't know coding. It's very important to have some collaboration where everybody can contribute to running this model, to understand use computational method. And this is kind of like one approach, we do, and this is what I do in my class. where we put students, some are more quantitative, some are more humanity approach. We tell them somebody can take the lead on writing the code, but other people are equally important to provide interpretation. And then the second approach is a paper we are working on is we are looking into how GPT-4, how can it provide a text description of images? So this is another way you don't know about coding. Let's say if there are researchers, in the near future, which show that so the paper we are working on is let's look at the text description generated by GPT-4 versus some of the on-the-shelf computer vision methods, unsupervised clustering method. To what extent GPT-4 allow us to understand some of the things existing computer vision method doesn't allow. So if we see that actually GPT-4 can provide some of the important, informative, and more explainable knowledge about an image, this is where I think it provides another direction for scholars who are more in the qualitative approach or who don't have the resources to run this large computing setup to understand image. So this is where I think generative AI, we also talk about in our chapter, where generative AI can be an approach maybe for us to think about how to analyze images and also video. There are also existing tools to analyze, just put in the video and they can generate result. But before we head ahead to do that position, we need to know empirically what thing they can do compared to existing computer vision methods.
Yes, I could have said it better myself. Yeah, I mean, collaborations are so increasingly becoming so important in academic work. And one thing that I've learned that when I was a graduate student I didn't really think about too much was that, computer scientists, people who are more in STEM fields want to work on social science questions. Not everybody is interested in training Teslas. Other people want to do other things with those skill sets, and they're generally interested in social science questions. So it's really important to reach out to those folks because it helps you develop your own skill set while also working in a really productive environment. So we have 15 minutes left. We have three more questions in chat. So we will get through these and then see where we're at. So the next question is, again, more substantively oriented. So it's regarding the use of the Moral Foundations Dictionary, do you also consider or measure their categories of virtue, morally right, and vice, morally wrong?
So we don't measure first. We don't measure the virtue. Like we are looking more into, do they use let me get to, so we are more using the generally speaking, we are just look at dimension by dimension. So for instance, any words regarding care and harm, they are all in the care foundation. So we just look at each dimension rather than going to look at care versus harm or authority versus the other, vice versa. So we don't do that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, but there's another kind of like a nuance point here, which is in our paper, again, in the supplemental material. So for the morality language, the method we do is we have a paper on a method called dictionary. So this is not, we are just using the existing moral foundation. It's not a dictionary approach. In the moral foundation dictionary, existing method, they basically develop a bunch of words related to care, and they assign the probability score of that words to care, right? And then they develop lots of words regarding loyalty. They assign a score to that. We don't do that. What we do is, no matter what words comes in, we all, kind of like treat them, we use the word embedding to see, whether they kind of lie together in terms of care. So every words, it's not about those words which are in the moral foundation dictionary. It's every word which could be contextually, semantically related. We put them give them a score regarding the care harm from each of the foundation. So it's actually not just, it's a combination of in the dictionary method and the word embedding. So we did some improvement on that.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much. So the next question is, so first, with respect to the videos that you chose for the study that you presented, how were those selected? I can't recall fully, like the hashtags. Was there some sort of restriction placed on the video selection methods? And then also, I know that you found kind of differences with respect to gender cues, but can you elaborate a little bit more about kind of what those differences kind of look like in practice? So if you see differences in gender cues, do you have a sense of, what was it particular types of cues that were more prevalent that define those differences, or was it, just kind of across the board, something along those lines? Thank you.
Okay, cool. Let me get to these are really two excellent questions. I love that so much. So the first question is, how do we do the data collection? Well, how do we develop the search term for climate change and vaccination, right? For both data collection platform. So when we do that, these are just some of the example words in our search words for each topic. So we go through a kind of like an iterative process. So the first is, there are already many wonderful work on social media when they look into climate change or vaccination issue. So they provide those hashtag or those keywords. So we look into those literature, right? Always getting us started on those seed words. After we have the seed word, then what we do is we use this initial lexicon, the seed word search query. We collect a random sample of video transcripts of, let's say, YouTube or TikTok. And then after we collect those transcripts from the seed word, right? What we did is we run a BERT model. We identify all the correlated words, which are semantically closely related to these seed words. That's gonna be a quite long list, because that cosine similarity score gonna give you many of the words. So this is where my research assistant, they go through a giant spreadsheet to see what are some of the new candidate search words which should pop up. So we go through that potential words list, and then we add words to the original lexicon. And then after that, we show the lexicon to scholars who work on climate change, who work on vaccination communication. We ask the expert, do we miss some of the words? Because we want to have the words which are coming from the platform we study. This is why we collect our transcripts based on the seed word and develop those words. But we also need some of knowing whether we are missing something on social media. So this is why we consult the experts. Here are the words. Do we really need this? Do we really need that? And then sometimes we find the words, if we just use one word, it can already represent many of the other format. Why not just keep one simple word? So this is an iterative process we did for the search words. So this is your first question. And then the second question, I think from the chat also, you ask is, specifically, what are the difference in terms of the gender pattern compare TikTok versus the YouTube, right? So this is where, let's say, we first look at, for instance, let's look at the morality language, the use of moral language. How does that look like? So we see that, for instance, when we look at those YouTube video description where they talk about she, her, hers, they do use a lot of the words talking about, let's be responsible, or Greta should be responsible for the climate, she needs to do that. So there are a lot of the words like using this kind of care. But we don't see actually a lot of those words in the TikTok videos. So compared to when they use men. So this is where we see the difference. Same for the loyalty. So all of those care related words, they actually appear more in the YouTube videos when they talk about women, but not on the TikTok. But then it's very interesting is on the TikTok, this is where like when they talk about men, they use a lot of authority related words. They will say, oh, now this is the figure who refute some of the things. So they use these authority related words, but it's not on the YouTube. So this is where we do the platform separately. And what's the reason, right? People ask, what's the reason why the strategy is deployed differently? So in the paper, we point out some of the potential reasons, because if you think about YouTube versus the TikTok, or YouTube is a much long format video. TikTok is a much more shorter format of videos. And also YouTube, they have a different audience base. If you look at the YouTube users, they are across all the age group. But for TikTok, it's more focusing on the young generation. And also there are other different factors on these two platforms. So this is where we kind of like stop in our paper, try to think about for future, what are really the systematic features, why some of the things appear on one platform, but not on the other. But the key things which have the real implication here is science communication is not a one-size-fits-all thing on social media. Many of the times I know that we are thinking about doing science communication, talk about science, trying to fix certain issues on social media. And when we deploy those messages, we can't just say, oh, I deploy on TikTok this way, and then I deploy on YouTube also on that way. The critical message here is, as a communicator practitioner, thinking about you want to address gender issue or other social identity issues, you really need to understand the platform, have a deeper knowledge of the platform you are working on. Because what we see empirically is content creator, their strategy differ. And there are other papers which also show not on gender, but on the use of like we, you, this kind of in-group, out-group words. It's also different when the same influencer, they use different amount of in-group, out-group words, depending on whether they use Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. So the empirical evidence already give us practitioner a message that you need to understand your platform when you deploy your message. It's not kind of you just can do a mass campaign on different platforms, try to target audience. But then for researchers, the next question for us is, what are some of the things why content creator do things differently when they are having both platforms? Because we do have people who have both platform, YouTube, TikTok, why they deploy social cues differently. So we need a more sick analysis to understand that point. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So I would love to ask one more question, but I think for the sake of time, we should wrap things up. Thank you so much for presenting this wonderful work. For those who are not familiar, Dr. Chen's website, I just put it into chat. Feel free to visit her website and see other fantastic things that she is doing outside of this project. So the next talk is March 15th at the same time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then April 19th, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The way that you found out about this talk is going to be the same way that you're going to find out about the next talk. So if it's social media, if it was the email that we send out, so forth and so on, please keep monitoring those channels. And also, if you enjoyed what we did today and would like to help us out, please, please, please circulate the video research workshop to your colleagues, friends, etc. The more, the merrier. We're really trying to bring together a variety of disciplines to talk about exciting ways to use text, audio, and video data for social science applications. And Dr. Chen's work could not be a better example of this. So with that said, if we would all give Dr. Chen a virtual round of applause, thank you so much, and we really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
All right. That's it. That's all we got. Feel free to exit the Zoom, and I look forward to seeing everybody at our next session on March 15th. Take care.